Thanks, Doug.
Good morning, everyone. It's really an honor to be here with you today. It's such a fantastic conference. I'm here to talk to you about how Israel, unlike all those other countries, in addition to all those other countries, really is punching above its weight. And I'm sure that's something that you all recognize from what you saw yesterday and that you'll continue to see throughout the day today. And it's exactly that which motivated my wife and I 4 years ago to move to Israel. We were living in New York. I was working on Wall Street. And one day we woke up and said, as a young investor, and in my wife's case, as a young entrepreneur, there's really no better place in the world to be than the startup nation. So I moved to Israel in order to come help found OurCrowd. And what OurCrowd is today is one of the 2 largest online venture capital platforms in the world. And our vision is to really democratize access to venture capital as an asset class. And the way that we do that is that we empower investors all over the world to join us in investing in promising early stage technology companies. So my partners and I, we go out, we find great companies. We see about 150 companies a month at the top of the funnel. We do all the research and diligence. We negotiate the terms, and ultimately we choose a very small percentage of companies that we want to invest in. And this is what's really innovative about what we're doing, that when we decide to invest, unlike a traditional VC firm that goes ahead and writes a check that comes originally from its institutional investor base, we actually then open up that investment to our network of 15,000 investors from over 100 different countries and invite them to join us alongside us in those investments. So we've invested over the last few years about $300 million in 100 portfolio companies. And those companies span across stage and sector and geography. So we were originally founded in Israel, and most of our portfolio is based in Israel. But today we've actually invested in 6 different countries, and I'm proud to say we've done 2 investments here in Australia and are actively looking for more investment opportunities here as well. So this is just a high-level kind of snapshot of the portfolio broken down by sector, which should give you a little bit of an understanding of kind of some of our key areas of interest. But taking a step back, to understand what's happening on a global scale at a macro level in terms of the venture capital industry. So Nagraj touched on this a bit yesterday, but venture funding, the pace of venture funding around the world is really slowing down. So both in terms of deal size and number of deals, it's on a decline. But somehow Israel is managing to buck this trend and is on pace for a record-setting year. Actually, it was just about a week and a half ago, the data came out for Q3, and Q3 was the 2nd largest funding quarter in a decade in Israel. So Israel's on pace for a record-setting year. One of the interesting things to note, because I'm going to come back to this in a second, is if you look at what the sources of that capital are. So it's a declining percentage of the money that's coming from the domestic Israeli VCs. So more and more foreign money is flowing in. Of course, though, the success of any ecosystem isn't just measured by the money coming in, but it's ultimately measured by what goes back to the investors. So if you actually look at last year as an example, back to last slide, it was slightly over $4 billion invested, and somewhere between $9 and $10 billion returned to investors. So that's a pattern that we want to continue to monitor. And as you all know, there are really 2 paths to liquidity, either an IPO or an M&A. And Israel's taken advantage of both of those avenues historically. And if you actually look at IPOs and you rank countries based on the number of companies that are listed on the major 2 New York stock exchanges, Israel actually comes in 4th, trailing only the US, China, and Canada. And in terms of M&A activity, look at the logos on the slide here. Household brands, every major MNC. And in the last decade, every one of these companies has acquired at least one Israeli startup. And I say at least because the pattern that's emerged, which is a really exciting pattern, is the first acquisition is not a one-and-done strategy. They use that first acquisition to establish a footprint with a local presence to be able to source more innovation, find more acquisition opportunities, more opportunities for partnering with the startup ecosystem. And that's a great trend. Something that I thought was really interesting that came up yesterday on one of the panel discussions was about how Australian startups, in contrast to Israeli and US startups, don't think about going big. And one of the explanations potentially that was given for why Australian startups don't think about going big is this concern as to where their next round of fundraising is going to come from, and being a shortage of kind of that growth later stage capital. So there's a really encouraging data point that came out of Israel last year, which I think speaks to the maturity of the ecosystem and the fact that there's been this mentality shift, at least within Israel, that the entrepreneurs are trying to build truly global large businesses. And that's that of the $1.5 billion raised by local Israeli VCs last year, among them were 6 new venture firms that were launched that are solely focused on the later stage growth opportunities. And we think that that will continue to drive the exits higher and higher. So if you think back to what I was saying about the fact that more and more of the capital is coming from foreign sources, of course the strengthening and deepening relationship with Chinese investors is a large part of what's driving that. Last year, Chinese investment in Israeli high tech was up over 50%. 2 months ago, it was unbelievable, it was the largest ever joint China-Israel conference hosted in Tel Aviv. Over 1,000 Chinese investors and strategic players came to Tel Aviv for a conference in order to explore opportunities. So it's really powerful what's happening there, and everyone thinks that this is just the beginning of the wave. And it makes a lot of sense that the Chinese are doing this because they and Israelis think that there's this perfect marriage between the scale that China offers and the innovation that Israel has. So the Chinese investors aren't just investing in Israeli companies and saying, I'll go along for the ride and kind of hope to have a good financial outcome. But they actually realize that by helping the Israeli startups commercialize in China, it's a great way of unlocking clear value in their portfolio investments, as well as potentially having a significant impact on the Chinese economy. And to be honest, I didn't know much about what was happening in Australia as it related to the collaboration efforts. And over the last few days, I've been amazed, to see the impact that that relationship has had as well. And if you look in the US, there are great precedents for how Israeli startups can really be punching above their weight in terms of having a meaningful economic impact on markets and ecosystems abroad. So Massachusetts is a phenomenal example. The state government of Massachusetts was really forward-thinking and wanting to build that bridge between the state and Israel. And this year, actually, they did a consulting study to measure the economic impact of those Israeli companies. And the results were startling. They ended up finding that Israeli companies directly employ close to 10,000 people in the state of Massachusetts, indirectly creating about 20,000 jobs. That Israeli companies based in Massachusetts generate $9 billion in revenue every year, and that it's a faster growing segment of the Massachusetts economy than any other segment. New York is another great example. There are 268 Israeli startups that are based in New York. There are 4 accelerators that are solely focused on Israeli startups in New York. The fastest growing company in New York is an Israeli startup called Startup. So there's no denying that all of this activity and the presence of the Israeli entrepreneurs is having a major imprint on the emerging tech giant that is the New York City ecosystem. It's kind of similar when you think about Silicon Valley, right? It's estimated that in the valley there's between 50 and 100,000 Israelis there. To put that in perspective, there are only 65,000 people that live in Palo Alto. So there's Israelis running around, there's Israelis employed at every major technology company, infusing it with a little bit of that Israeli DNA. Another really exciting initiative that is going to deepen that collaboration between New York and Israel is the joint Cornell-Technion Innovation Campus. So for those of you that are not familiar with this, New York City decided that on Roosevelt Island they wanted to build a whole new campus. So they put it out for bid to all of the top academic institutions in the world. And Cornell did something really smart. They turned to one of the prestigious Israeli universities that's well known for its prowess in innovation, the Technion, and said, why don't we bid for this together? And there's no doubting that that went a long way in helping them secure the bid. And just to, again, translate that into economic impact, it's projected that this joint initiative is going to have an impact of $23 billion on New York City over the next few decades. But economic impact is just one way of measuring how Israeli startups are punching above their weight abroad. Yesterday we had a phenomenal panel on the importance of impact investing. So one of the other things that I think we're really excited about is Israel developing truly world-changing technologies that are benefiting society. So I just want to highlight a few examples. There's one company that's called Lumos. So Lumos, if you look at that little yellow box in the corner of the room, Lumos has developed a solar-powered generator that's providing electricity to Africans that live in off-grid areas. So it's the first solar-powered generator where they can install it themselves. It has anti-theft built in, flexible payment systems, and people are getting to have electricity for the first time in their lives. Another company, Zebra Medical Imaging. What Zebra's doing is they're using machine learning algorithms in order to automate what radiologists do, with the ultimate vision of being able to enable patients anywhere in the world to immediately know what's wrong with them and at no cost, really changing the face of healthcare. And lastly, taking something as mundane as the consumer packaged goods industry. So we fill landfill after landfill with our waste, and what TIPA has brought to market is the first fully biodegradable and fully compostable packaging. And if you look at the image, you can see that over a matter of weeks, the package leaves virtually no trace. And all of that is something that's very exciting. Perhaps one of the most meaningful events that happened this year was the passing of Shimon Peres. For those of you who don't know who Shimon Peres is, you probably live under a rock, but Shimon Peres was one of the founding fathers of Israel, lifetime politician dedicated to Israel. And what's interesting about Shimon Peres is that he was a true technology visionary. And if you've read the book Startup Nation, in addition to having lots of great quotes from Dov Moran, the most often quoted person in that book is actually Shimon Peres. It's not an entrepreneur, not an investor, but it's this man who's credited with laying a lot of the infrastructure for Israel emerging as this technology leader. And it wasn't, he really believed that we couldn't just rest on the laurels of kind of our past technological successes, and believed that science and technology were a key driver in our future. And to that end, it's in line with how we think about things as investors. So yesterday, we talked a lot about that Israel's become well known for cyber or life sciences, but we're really focused on kind of what are those next emerging areas and how is Israel positioned to capitalize on those opportunities. So some of the frontier technologies that we're spending a lot of time looking at, so one of them is the virtual reality, augmented reality opportunity. Alon did an amazing presentation on this yesterday, so I won't dwell on it too much. The only thing I'll say is that the opportunity is not missed even at the highest levels of government. So here's a picture of Shimon Peres with President Rivlin and Prime Minister Netanyahu all experiencing virtual reality firsthand. Another area which has come up a little bit yesterday is the area of automotive. So we really think that the interdisciplinary nature of the Israeli tech community positions it well to be a leader in the automotive area, as does kind of the positive spillover effect for some of Israel's great success stories, such as Waze and Mobileye and others. And really, the top-tier auto OEMs have recognized this, investing heavily in Israel. GM just launched a significant development center in Israel. Volkswagen invested $300 million in the Israeli company Get. One area in particular to focus on is actually the intersection of cybersecurity and automotive. So obviously autonomous connected vehicles are going to impact our lives in ways that we can't even imagine. But one of the scary aspects is that the cars are hackable. If you actually haven't seen it, I suggest you go on YouTube and look up. There's a 60 Minutes, which is a news program in the States, segment about car hacking. But one of our portfolio companies, Argus, as well as a few other Israeli companies, are really leading the way when it comes to securing those future autonomous connected vehicles. And the last example I'll give is drone technology. Little known fact, Israel is the world's leading exporter in military drones. So it should come as no surprise that when those men and women leave the military and they have this deep knowledge and expertise in drone technology, that they're figuring out ways to translate that into commercial applications within the civilian world. So that's an area we haven't actually made an investment in yet, but we're seeing a significant increase in the deal flow from that area. So given kind of all of that, it's no wonder that Israel's ranked as the #2 most innovative country in the world, and I think second to Switzerland, I don't remember exactly. But the thing that we think a lot about and we try to discuss and assess, and especially when we're speaking at conferences around the world or when we're hosting delegations, is what really is driving that? And what of those things, if any, are replicatable elsewhere? So there's a lot of examples. But I think the main one is right behind me. The main reason, which is the hummus, it's just so creamy. No, I'm just joking. But historically, the reasons given are up here on the board. These are the main reasons that are given, and there's a lot that's been written about this, and a lot of people have spoken about this. What's interesting and a little bit challenging for a country like Australia is you look at some of this list and you say, well, that's uniquely Israeli. So the fact that Israel has to go global from day one because it has a small domestic market, right? No one would recommend that Australia shrink the size of its domestic market in order to be more innovative. Same thing with mandatory military service. But I don't want to dwell too many on these things because these things have really been kind of hashed out by others. The reasons that I want to talk about today are things that I've experienced firsthand just in my time living there. They're also things that I think are a little bit more universal and things that we actually share in common with Australia. So the first one is a good life. Israelis are happy. And that comes as a huge surprise to a lot of people. I mean, it's a country that is facing threats from all of its neighbors, but it actually ranks 11th in the world on the happiness index. You probably didn't know that there was a happiness index, but there is, and Israel performs well. And that helps foster innovation. And you'll be happy to know, actually, I didn't put it up here, but Australia ranks 9th. So as far as that skill set, Australia is right there neck and neck with Israel. Another thing which I've now become uniquely familiar with, this is a picture of me doing a hike with my newborn son, is I'm a new father of a 9-month-old baby. So I'm raising the first Sabra, which is what you call a native-born Israeli, on either side of the family in history. And experiencing kind of what my son is going through and also seeing what happens in Israel, Israeli childhood is very different than at least how I grew up in the US and how I imagine people grow up here. And one of those things is just that Israeli kids aren't sheltered. They have this freedom to roam the streets. You see 5-year-olds just walking themselves to the park. And that freedom and that spirit is really helps foster the innovation. How many of you know what Bamba is? Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Bamba is that little orange bag, that snack in the corner. So Bamba is a favorite snack of Israeli infants. It's a little peanut puff. And what's interesting is that there's actually academic research which shows that Israeli children are 10 times less likely to develop peanut allergies than kids living elsewhere because of their early exposure to peanuts. You know, what does that have to do with contributing to a risk-positive society? I don't know. But I think that it's interesting, and when I think about my son, I'm like, yeah, I've got a great little Israeli daredevil. He's eating peanuts already. You know, his cousins in the US won't see those things for years. So, you know, I call that the Bamba effect. Other things is youth leadership, so participation in youth groups teaches kids invaluable life skills. And another one which I think is really in common with Australia is this tendency to travel. So every year, every single class in all of Israel, they take this amazing outdoor expedition and they go for a few days. So hiking is deeply ingrained in the culture. But then after their military service, you will find Israelis going off for 6, 12 months to everywhere around the world, something that I've come to learn Australians do as well. And I think that worldliness and exposure to other cultures and ideas, all of that contributes back to being an innovative ecosystem. Just in the interest of time, I'll fast forward to the next one, which is that it's a diverse and complex society. So people have moved to Israel from all 4 corners of the world, and you have Israelis in all shapes, sizes, and colors. And if you look at the data, there's no denying, both in the US and in Israel, that immigrant populations have a significant impact on the emergence of technology ecosystems. So first and second generation entrepreneurs. You know, in Israel, one of the great examples is that when in the early 90s, when 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union moved to Israel, among them were 82,000 trained engineers. Many of those people went on to play critical roles in the emergence of the ecosystem. So I just want to thank you, but I want to end with an important invitation, and that is that if you haven't been to Israel, you should come visit us. And when you do come, you are all invited to my house for an authentic traditional Shabbat meal. We're good cooks. I actually recently made that offer at a conference in Bulgaria and have already hosted one person from that room. So I expect at least one person from Australia to take me up on that offer. But thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here.